Kenny, we are now live.
Great. What do we do if we don't have quorum?
Hopefully,
I mean, welcome. Is that what we do?
Joseph is supposed to be joining us. We just may have some late stragglers. We can go ahead and have a discussion. We just can't vote on anything.
Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome to the May 22nd virtual meeting of the Multimodal Transportation Commission. We are a commission that is established to assist the city in furthering, advancing, and promoting a comprehensive and integrated transportation system for the city of Asheville that incorporates multimodal concepts, which include, but are not limited to, transit, bicycle, and pedestrian facilities. We also love greenways, complete streets, and roads in general. I guess to kick us off, we will, oh, great, we've got tons of people here. Well, let's go down the list and see who's here. When I call your name, say aye and or present, and let us know the last time you rode a bike or had a good walk or took a bus. I'll go first. I'm Kenny. I'm the vice chair of this commission. Jack Eigelman, our chair, is in Spain or something, so he won't be here. My last bike ride was this afternoon. I've been biking to the playground with my kids pretty much every day lately. And I'll go down the list. Joseph, no Joseph. Leanna, no Leanna. Bill Loftus.
Present. Hadn't rode a bike in a while. I walk a lot. I walk a lot. And I ride the bus occasionally, most recently to go meet with Joe and Jared in our working group meeting. And the bus was perfect.
Great. Elise?
Hi, I'm here. My name is Elise Martyr, and I recently was doing some traveling both in New York City and in Chicago. And I traveled by plane, train, bus, bike, and boat.
That's too many modes. Randy.
Thanks. I'm Randy Warren, and I rode from Spartanburg to Mount Mitchell 2 days ago, a Monday, which we do every year about this time of year. And then tonight I'll be racing at the Ring of Fire in Carrier Park on the Melodrome down there. So if you don't have anything to do when you get done with this meeting, you can head down to Carrier Park and watch some bike racing locally here in Asheville.
Great. Thanks, y'all. That's all the voting members, but we also have Jake Smith and Jared Wheatley. So Jake.
Hello, my name is Jake Smith. I am a non-voting member of the LMTC and also a board member of the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. Last time I had a great adventure was over the Mother's Day weekend. We went to Raleigh, North Carolina, and walked around the entire downtown area, museum hopping, and just spending the days with our family. The next multimodal transit opportunity is my son's Power Wheels is being charged on the front porch for his birthday this weekend.
Nice. Hope that wasn't a secret. Jared.
Hey there, I'm liaison to Planning and Zoning Commission, and currently I walk a lot like Bill. I'm walking about 10 miles a day right now, and my current goal is to walk every street in every legacy neighborhood to better understand some of those communities.
Fantastic. Everybody, anybody who's Zooming in, we've got a lot of city staff and county staff even, so thank you everybody for joining. Our council liaison is Maggie Ullman. I don't think she's here today. So let's get into it. The agenda, has everybody looked at it? Can we vote to approve it?
I move to approve.
Great. Any second?
I'll second.
Randy? Great. Any discussion?
Kenny, we don't have a
Hi.
quorum.
What?
We don't have a quorum. We need one more.
Oh man. Okay. Well, never mind. That was a good discussion of the agenda. Well, do we need to even talk about the minutes then?
You
I
can
guess not.
see if anybody has any revisions.
Yeah, they're looking really thorough these days. I appreciate that. Okay, well, we can just go down the list then, and then if we need to vote on something, we'll go back. That works. All right. Well, there's no public comment. Since we're in discussion mode, let's just jump into announcements. Anybody have any cool things other than the going down to Carrier Park and watching Randy go round and around in circles? Jake.
I got my new bike light for my cargo bike. Nice rechargeable one. And as some of you may have seen, my new belt came in for my bike. I've been building this. It was a very short-term project that turned into a very long-term project, as sometimes things do. But the next big thing is to build a aluminum box that will mount the battery underneath the cargo area.
Excellent. I just have one thing. The Asheville City School Board is meeting on June 10th, and they need to vote on an approval for the city to enter into an easement agreement to install the Asheville Unpaved project that's going on the middle school property. So if anybody cares to go to that meeting and hear the discussion and see what the pros and cons might be, or if you're so inclined to provide public comment, I think our chair, Jack, will be there, and I'll try to be there as well. And then Lucy further on has a staff update about that project. If there's anybody have any other updates? If not, we'll move on to new business. Hearing none, we'll jump in. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. I appreciate the welcome. I'm happy to be here, and I'll be brief. I'm the interim transportation director, and I've had many years' experience in the transportation field. I've managed all modes of transportation, public transit, railroads, aviation, marine, pretty much done it all. And since I retired 5 years ago, I've been doing interim assignments. And so the city asked me, I just finished up a winter in San Diego, which was not too rough. And so I came back the 1st of March, and they asked me if I would be willing to step in and work with them and work with the department for maybe 4 months or so, help them to find a permanent transportation director. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm happy to be here and meeting lots of good folks. And I can assure you, you've got some great folks working here in the city on behalf of all of us citizens. I'm a 28-year resident of the town of Weaverville. I've raised my family here, and so I feel like I have a good feel for the history and what's been developing over the years. And I've quite frankly always been an admirer of the progress that Asheville has made in multimodal endeavors, quite frankly. So I'm happy to be here, and it's an honor to be a part of this process. So thank you, Ken.
Jared?
Hey there, Paul. It's great to meet you. I'm Jared, kind of liaison to Planning and Zoning Commission. And it's really, really cool to hear some of your background and the diversity of that background in different cities. I'm interested to know, in other cities, have you seen much integration between planning and zoning and the transportation department?
Yes, and actually that's been increasing. It's increasing to the point where in some locations it's become a political issue. You know, all of a sudden transportation and integration is now some sort of a political process. So that's one problem area, but absolutely, you know, more and more that absolutely has to be considered, you know, whether it's land use planning or whatever you're talking about, it's critical. All of the infrastructure and you know, transit and all the other infrastructure has to be considered as part of the whole.
Could you expand on what the political issue is becoming?
I think transportation as a land use decider has generated some negative discussions and around the country, and I've encountered some of that. I don't think it's based on fact. It's just something. It's the latest trend that I'm seeing.
When you say land, did you say land use provider?
Planning.
So I guess and I'm sorry, I'm
No,
super
that's okay.
so I might be just missing the point. Are you saying that people are not encouraging?
At some locations, unfortunately, it's kind of like when you talk about greenways. That's going to raise my taxes, and that's what they automatically go to. And so, as you talk about marrying transportation planning, whether it's public transit or bicycles or whatever, and you start tying that in with planning and zoning and that sort of thing, there's just some sort of suspicion that there's a secret plan behind all that. If I fully understood it, I could make a lot of money. I don't, but I'm just saying that's one of the issues that I've seen develop elsewhere. And so,
okay.
So and that's probably not terribly helpful to you, but
yeah, I personally find it really helpful just because in our community, like you said, in Weaverville, but I know in our community sometimes I think folks on this board are generally enthusiastic about encouraging more density around transit supportive corridors. And then also I think maybe some folks on here might be familiar with some of the anti-development backlash that can happen when that rezoning starts to occur. So I think that's something we probably all face on this meeting.
Right, but I think there are real positive aspects to it, like the Commonwealth of Massachusetts passed a law requiring that all of the MBTA communities, and there's 78 or 84, they must adjust their zoning to allow for increased density housing units within a certain distance of public transit facilities, train stations, major bus routes. And so I think that's a very positive development. They're getting pushback from some of the communities, but I think they're a leader in that state for trying to tie public transportation into zoning and density and those sorts of things.
That's super cool. I'll have to dig into that and read a little bit more.
Yeah, it's got I think it's a July 1 or end of this year. They have to all the communities are required to have adjusted their zonings to permit that, and there's a number of those communities are pushing back, but the state's leverage is that all those communities receive no more state funds for anything. So it's a pretty heavy hammer over their head. So I mean, I think they did the complete package in the bill that they passed. We'll just, and of course it's going to go through the court system as well, but so that's a positive example, I think.
Super cool. Looking forward to hearing more about your experience and what you've seen elsewhere.
Thank you.
Paul, do you have any guidance as we work towards improving our transportation system on not avoiding the political muddiness of it, but getting ahead of it? I mean, I know that the city does a great job with public engagement and due diligence, and yet we get to a implementation phase and everybody's like, well, I didn't know about this, or I didn't say yes to this. So how do you, any advice?
Well, it's quite frankly, it's common sense, and the vast majority of the challenges I've dealt with over the years have involved in lack of communications and lack of relationships. Unfortunately, meeting like this does not help relationships, and so it makes it tougher when you don't meet in person. But I think that it's communication and building relationships and having open dialogue and communication, because we're the good guys. I mean, we've always been the good guys, trying to blend all the modes together and move people and not vehicles, and freight and not trucks. We have to change that whole mindset, and so there's been some progress, but I would say communications, relationships, and the big need, of course, is funding. Is every place I've been, I've struggled to identify what's the dedicated local source of funding, and different communities do it different ways, and some communities don't address it. I've been in communities where every year we go to the city council with a general fund request, and we have to fight, with all the other departments to get a fair share. And so I think funding and a reliable source of funding for local entities is the other critical issue that we all need to work for. That's the key, because we have a great staff, they've got great ideas, but they're so really restricted by available funding.
For sure. Well, we appreciate you being here. Does anybody else have any questions for Paul? If not, I guess we can let you go.
Oh, I'll hang around. I'm interested in what you do.
Oh, great.
I'm going to hang in.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you being here, and thanks for helping with the job search. All right. Wait, Jared, what's up?
One more quick question. As the interim director, were you tasked with any, outside of assisting with finding the permanent director, were you tasked with any specific, aim or deliverable?
Yeah, and that's really an excellent question. First of all, help them find a permanent director, but work with the existing department, provide them with backup, the staff with backup, support them, help them to continue to develop as a team. And that's turning out to be a fairly easy task because we have some really super qualified and experienced people. But there were some specific issues I've been asked to really tackle. One is the operating contract with the private company that operates the public transit system here. We enter year 8 of an 8-year contract on July 1st. So we're about 13 and a half months away from having to have that contract renewed or competitively procured, and either renewed or with a new vendor. So I'm working very closely with Amber on developing the RFP for that, making sure that we define clearly what it is we're looking for, and provide something that multiple companies can bid. So that's a big part of it. The other issue I've been asked to work on is the comprehensive operational analysis that has been funded, and this will allow us to bring in a consultant to come in and to look at multiple aspects of the operation of the public transit system. Where the buses operate, how they operate, what's the future of all fuel vehicles for us here, what are the limitations on the types of vehicles that we can use. So it's a pretty all-encompassing. And then we also want to take a look at how the funding works. I think we have some challenges here on how funding really works for public transit, and its limitations for growing public transit in the future. And so that's on the transit end. On the parking end, we just ran an ad for a new parking division director. I think we've had some challenges in our parking area. So we manage all the municipal parking garages, the on-street parking. And so we're trying to sort through some of their contracts and some of the work that they do to help them be better organized. We actually have a consultant that's started some work. I'm working with them, and they're coming up with suggestions on how to restructure the parking department. So that's something that I'm spending a fair amount of time. I'm working with the planning department. Our transportation planning department really has things going very well. Lucy does a super job running that. And then I work with Chris Cairns in traffic engineering, and he's super qualified. So he basically does that, and I just say, looks good, Chris. So those are kind of the things that I've been asked to generally look at. And another issue I'm looking at is, and I've followed for many years, is the reestablishment of passenger rail service to Asheville. And the state has actually received $500,000 per corridor for 7 corridors in North Carolina, and one of the corridors is Asheville connecting to Salisbury. So we'll be able to connect with the national railroad. So I'm participating in some activities on that. So that's the 5-minute answer to the general stuff, and then a lot of other stuff shows up. So, but those are kind of the key things.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying moving freight and moving people rather than trucks and cars. Randy, what's on your mind?
Oh, sure. I was just wondering, Paul, thanks for being here. We appreciate you filling this role and helping the city out in this way. What's the timeline for hiring a permanent director at this point?
It's my impression that they'd like to have someone here by Labor Day. So that's the goal we're working at. You know, the position's been advertised. They did some outreach and they did some interviews last fall, I'm told. And for whatever reason, they didn't come up with a candidate. And so, you know, they've taken another look at the job description. It's being re-advertised anytime now. So we'll give it a fresh look and see what we turn up. And I'm also suggesting to them some new places to advertise, because I think maybe we didn't hit all the places that people actually look for jobs. So I'll help them with that too.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just to follow up real quick, is there any opportunity for us to provide any input in that process? I mean, the first time we didn't have any at all, but it seems like sometimes the priorities, I mean, I know that we're one of, 100 different priorities probably for the city transportation department, but it seems like if there's some opportunity for, I think actually in other situations, we've got to do meet and greets with the final candidates and that kind of stuff. I wonder if that's going to come up for us as well.
Well, I've been with the city for 3 weeks, so, I don't know in detail what their process is. I would certainly encourage, input from the commission members, and I would be more than happy to take that input or meet with you or have discussions from anybody on the commission who would like to suggest, skills and attributes, qualifications that you think are important. I think the job description has been, largely done. But through the process of interviews, there can be key questions. Like if you've got a question or two you'd like to have asked of the candidates, I'm going to be on the review panel, and I think that I can try to work them in. No promises, because as I said, 3 weeks experience on the job. So, and I want to follow the process that the city establishes. So, but I think it should be flexible enough that if you have some issues, I'd be happy to see if I can work them in.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, I had a follow-up question on the passenger train project. And I know it's a while in the future, but nonetheless, this group would be interested in how the connections between that new rail terminal fits in with the rest of our connections in the city. So is that to what extent is that already designed or concepted, or is that open game? In other words, is that the kind of thing this group would want to play a role in, just being a part of that process?
I think it would be a great role. From what I know, and I've followed this issue for a number of years. In fact, back in the late 90s, I was on a Chamber of Commerce, Asheville Chamber of Commerce task force that worked actively on this. And then the thing went dormant really for a long time.
Right.
A number of years ago, I believe I'm right in saying this, the city bought property in the Biltmore Village area for a station site. And I can't prove that, and I haven't researched it yet, but I believe we already have the station site purchased.
Okay.
What's been the recent discussion has been, well, maybe it should be in the River Arts District, because that area has developed so much. That would involve probably a second station and an extension of the line. But all this is just now coming up because this Federal Railroad Administration award of $500,000 to this line is really regenerating a lot of interest. There are some local match requirements. It's the belief of the supporters and NCDOT that the TDA, the development agency, would provide some local match to support the federal money for that engineering study. So I mean, it's starting to get serious again when we're actually talking about engineering. So I'm encouraged by it. I mean, I've gotten discouraged in the past, but I'm kind of encouraged that maybe it's actually going to happen this time.
But it sounds like it's still to be worked out, which is
Oh
good
yeah,
news,
I think so. I mean, I think
Okay.
obviously in Asheville, the key is where's the station going to be, and
Right.
and I think that there's one property that I believe is already purchased. There's another that's been raised, but I think the visibility of this project is now being raised once again because this money has come through. NCDOT is a strong supporter of this. They've put a lot of money into the Charlotte Raleigh line. I think they're up to 5 or 6 trains a day. The line to Wilmington is one of the routes that's been established, to serve the eastern part of the state, and then Asheville was included. So I think we're seeing some real action now.
Okay. But as of right now, while you're here, you would be the link to that project that we would connect to?
That's my belief at this point. Once again, I've been here 3 weeks, so I'm still trying to sort out who does what, but that's the role I would like to play. We'll see.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, great. Thanks, Paul. We appreciate you being here, and I'm sure you'll be getting emails from all of us on this committee.
That's fine. Thank you, and I appreciate all the questions and the welcome. I'm happy to be here. This is the kind of work I love to do, so I'm happy to be here working with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. The next item on our agenda is commission membership. Both Joseph and I are cycling. Well, we have a term expiring in July, and we both expressed interest in fulfilling a second term. But we also have 5 people on our list. Yes, Randy.
Kenny, I'm sorry. If we don't have a quorum, I don't believe we'll be able to vote on this issue. Do we want to discuss it first anyway, or do we want to postpone it for a quorum?
Yeah, well, I mean, we can discuss if you want. That was my thought, and then we could just roll call vote at the next meeting. I was going to say that I know Kate Reinba and Jake Smith personally. Hi, Jake. And I would fully endorse Jake. We know he shows up, and I think he'd be a really good fit. So, yeah. Anyway, but we'll have to vote next time. Elise?
I was just going to say regarding making a recommendation, the council is going to meet on June 25th, at which point I think earlier in the day, the boards and commissions council committee will meet, and they'll vote on their recommendations that then go to council later that evening. And we don't meet again until June 26th. So I think even though we can't officially vote on it, I think staff can still provide our discussion to the boards and commission council committee, because ultimately they're the ones that have to make that vote. And given that they're only doing that kind of stuff quarterly, I wouldn't want us to miss our opportunity here. Is staff members, if you know more about this and want to attest to anything, please.
This is Jessica. Yeah, I think that makes sense. You're advising the city council. I think that we can do that in a way that is still getting to the essence of what you'd like to see. If we can get consensus on who you'd like to forward, I think we can indicate that this was the consensus, but that there wasn't an official vote.
Like an off the record motion.
Yeah, I think we did that one time, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, where we had kind of you guys got a whole big list of applications, and then we kind of forward them a top 5 list, and they took it from there. So you could do something of that nature, likely.
Bill?
2 questions. One is, so we saw 5 applications in the minutes, right? Or the agenda. So, but how many of these 5 are we deciding on?
I believe there's 1 vacant spot. Joseph Barker stepped off, so we're filling his seat.
Okay. And,
unless you want to kick me and Joseph Chesler off and fill one of our switch seats with somebody new, which, you know, I'm open to. If we've got good candidates, so if somebody wants to kick me off for somebody else,
Well,
free.
you know, Kenny, there's value in going with the devil you know as opposed to the devil you don't. So that was a joke, by the way. Okay, so 1 out of 5. And the other thing, didn't Leanna and Joe institute a process or start instituting a process about the way in which we select people, or did that ever get finished?
There was a survey that we filled out, I believe, that kind of expressed different interests and different sort of niches that we thought we weren't filling with our current roster.
I mean, if we got started with a process, even if it's not finished, we may want to just revisit that process to make it better or something. I mean, I hate to take a step forward and quit, you know. It's if we made any progress at all, we ought to try to align to that kind of that methodology, unless for some reason it just doesn't work.
I think a big piece of my selection is knowing who shows up. And Jake, that's you, buddy. You're always right here at 2:30, and yeah, I mean, I think that goes a long way. So, Randy?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry. I always forget.
And then Jake, do you want to be on this commission?
I would love to be on the commission. I also wouldn't vote to take my seat away from a more qualified candidate. I definitely appreciate being part of the conversation, regardless of the fact if I get to vote or not. However, I do think I have a valued input, and my vote would be heavy in sway of the right choice.
That's good.
I'm trying to find that matrix right now that you guys had looked at. I'll see if I can find it. But also, I was curious, Jake, do you know if there's someone on the neighborhood services? I'm sorry, the neighborhood committee that would be willing to take your spot?
We don't have another meeting until the end of June, I believe. Is that right, Elise?
It's July that we have another meeting, but considering there's already 2 of us from NAC who are here, I'm wondering if we would temporarily pause that liaison position since we already have 2 representatives.
That's an option.
Yeah. There's also concern that if we get too many neighborhood advisory committee members on here, that we would have quorum from that board. So that's something to consider. As far as somebody else joining, I don't know of anybody that's I guess I haven't really polled anyone on the board. Our last meeting was a month ago, and just due to the holiday, we won't be able to, or we aren't having another meeting until July, as Elise had mentioned.
Randy or Elise, both of you?
Well, I was just gonna say that since Bill, it'd be nice if we had something else to aid us in this process, and I don't think anything's ready at this point in time. So it'd be something that probably we should continue. But to Lisa's point, if we want to make any recommendation at all before the next opportunity for the commission to vote and then the council to vote, I think it'd be difficult or challenging to use a device to help us do that if we don't have it already prepared. And it'd be nice to have that to come out with, if we had that, to have it so that when we prepared for this, we could fit things into, that whatever instrument that is that we're going to use to help us decide. But I just want to say too, I think Kenny and Joe both have been very good. And I think that I endorse having them both continue on for sure. I guess my only thing about Jake is I'm just thinking that if we could get Jake even as a non-voting member and then add someone else on and we keep Jake, then that's an advantage of almost, even though you don't get to vote, I think that being a non-voting member in my mind is almost as valuable as being a voting member in this group, because I think there's an equal voice to non-voting members, even if you don't get a vote, and you have a really strong influence on us with your comments and everything else too, even if you don't get to vote. But that's just something we want to consider as well.
But Jake, I believe are you cycling off of NAC, and that's why you're trying to get on this commission?
I actually signed up for another term. The city boards are fairly interesting. I had signed up in January last year and did not realize at the time that, I guess I didn't read my email well enough, that I was filling in another retiring member's seat for the remainder of their term, which would have then been me having my term expire in June. I was invited to stick around for another term, and I did accept that.
Okay. Elise? Sorry, I keep saying Elise.
Thank you. I was trying to dig up that survey and I found the survey where we were requested to fill it out, but I don't actually see the responses, but that was separate from what I wanted to ask. I was just curious. I know Joe Chesler has been away for a while, and I'm just curious if there's a timeline for when we expect him to be back. I know, well, how do I say this? I appreciate the effort that and the involvement he's able to give, considering he's several time zones away. But I'm just wondering, since he's not able to be here in like a full capacity, and if we knew how long that might be, if that might have any effect on our decision-making process.
He did offer to step down if that would help with quorum and everything like that. So it wouldn't be a tall ask, but I don't know. I don't know how long he's in California.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if he's only got a few more months or something, I'm like, yeah, Joe, we'd love to have you back in a full capacity. I'm just curious if there's any knowledge on what that timeline looks like.
I thought he said 6 months, and that was a couple months ago. So not forever, but well, and also Mike's a little
yeah, at least he mentioned that in our meeting yesterday. He attended transit yesterday, and it seems to me that came up, and I'm thinking it's in the couple months time frame as opposed to indefinitely. So I think it's rather short term. I mean, he's been gone 3 or 4 already, right? I think he left in January.
Well, thank you for providing that information. I'm certainly satisfied with that answer and would love to keep him on the commission. Considering he'll be back in our state, in our time zone pretty soon, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's hard when we have so many excellent people trying to be on these committees, and it's like, sorry, you got to wait 3 years for somebody's turn to end. But so is this, Jessica? Do you think this discussion is enough to do something with council, or?
Well, I've heard that there's consensus on forwarding Jake Smith as a member, as well as Joseph Chesler, and you, Kenny, to be re-upped. That's what I've heard. Does that sound accurate? Okay, then we will forward that as a consensus indication to the council. So when they make their appointments in June, they will have that information. And I will note that we didn't have a quorum, but that it was unanimous of the members that were present, if that is accurate. Not seeing any.
I think so.
Okay, we can do that.
Except for Randy's point of keeping Jake on as a non-voting member and having a new voting member join on. But yeah, Randy.
Yeah, I would just say if they're considering that type of thing, I think that Kate Riva, is your last name? She seemed like my next candidate in terms of the cycling of that, if they wanted to know that kind of information.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Bill?
Yeah, and Jake, I mean, I want you included. So if you could not become a voting member, if that would dissuade your eagerness and interest, then I would want you to stay as a voting. If you're equal, I liked what I read about Kate because she's an urban planner and has a nice network outside of this commission, and I saw those as being advantages. So I guess my sense is I want to make sure, Jake, you're in, but I also like the idea of having an urban planner and another networker as part of the group. So that's my 2 cents.
What say you, Jake?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I definitely don't want to take the seat away from the right person, and I'd be happy to be on the board, voting or non-voting. I did put my application in because I felt I was a worthwhile candidate, but like I said, I'm happy either way. And also, I don't get to vote who gets to stay in the seat. So,
Well, we don't get to vote either because we don't have a quorum, at least.
I guess I'm throwing out the suggestion that maybe we forward those 4 names with Kate included and kind of leave it up to the boards and commission committee to make that final say. I mean, they don't have to listen to our recommendation at all anyway, but hopefully they do.
Okay, so highlight Jake and Kate Ryba and see what they think. Okay. All right. Well, moving on in the effort of keeping us on track, proposed right-of-way closure. Staff presentation. We have review and consider a proposed closure. I guess we can review and consider without voting. Unless you want to just postpone it.
Well, and we have the county folks here. I didn't realize there wasn't going to be a quorum today. So my preference would be for there to be an actual vote. However, I don't know if that really messes the county up if we were to postpone this vote until the June meeting, which would be, would be June 26th. Matt, I know you're on here. Matt Card, do you see any issue with that?
Yeah, I don't really see any issue with that. I mean, we're moving through the process right now. That process is taking some time anyways. We're not going to have the survey work done until the middle of June. So I don't see why we could delay it 1 more month.
Okay. That would be my preference.
To delay the presentation.
Yeah, I'd rather give the presentation when we can actually have a vote.
Okay. Well, sorry, county folks, for wasting your time, but we appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Seems like a really good project. Oh, sorry, Jessica.
I'll touch base with you after this, Matt.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Keep up the good work getting some housing downtown.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is the Cox Avenue update. It's a project presentation from Dustin Clemens.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dustin Clemens. I'm a division manager for the Capital Projects Department. I've got a presentation I'm working on sharing right now. Can everybody see my screen? Great, thank you all. I'm giving you a high-level update and overview of the Cox Avenue Complete Streets project. Hopefully you all have heard a little bit about this in the past, and I'll give you a little bit more information on that project. The key takeaways and highlights are we're working on a Complete Streets project for the entire length of Cox Avenue from Patton Avenue to Southside Avenue. This project is funded in most part through an NCDOT grant to improve bicycle and pedestrian access through that corridor. Even though it's focused on those bicycle and pedestrian improvements, we know that there are other infrastructure improvements that will have to be updated in order to make those improvements. So we expect not only sidewalk, bike lane improvements, but also significant storm sewer infrastructure, lighting, and streetscape elements to be a part of this project. We do have funding in place right now for all of the design, and we hope most, if not all, of the easements that would be needed. We also have funding committed for construction, and I'll get into the details of the funding in a future slide. We're still early in the design process right now, but we do anticipate this summer, probably later this summer, to start being in a position where we can share more detailed design updates and get more feedback on the design that we're working on right now. And then hopefully, assuming that design process goes well and public participation goes well, we could be starting construction as early as summer of next year. There's a high chance that we'll have to phase the construction, mostly due to limiting budget, but also there's some future development that might make sense for us to phase construction to accommodate what might happen on the northern portion of the corridor. The budget overall, this is the total project budget breakdown at a high level. This number has changed recently. I think it was less than 3 weeks ago. We received an additional grant from the Tourism Product Development Trust Fund for around $2.9 million for additional construction funding that can help with some of the aesthetic improvements for the corridor. So that bumped us up to just shy of a $15 million total project budget. The overall project schedule, this is just a high-level Gantt overview of the anticipated schedule for the whole project. Right now, we're in the concept/schematic design process. We hope to be wrapping that up in the next few weeks, and then moving right into the design development phase. We're sort of slow rolling this early design because we want to work really closely with NCDOT to make sure anything we're proposing is going to be what they would consider an eligible expense, because we don't have a lot of extra money on this project outside of the match money and outside of the TPDF money that I mentioned earlier. So we need to have a really high level of confidence that everything that we're proposing is going to be considered a reimbursable expense from NCDOT. So we've started those conversations with NCDOT early. We've gotten good support from the local division, and they are helping us sort of work out with the other NCDOT folks in Raleigh to make sure that we've got consensus on expectations. And as you can see in the schedule, again, we hope to be starting construction in summer of next year. In terms of scope for the project, we're anticipating, again, the whole corridor of Cox Avenue from right-of-way line to right-of-way line. So it's a fairly wide right-of-way through this section. There's very deep stormwater services that will have to be upgraded and replaced. There is also a water main going down Cox Avenue that we anticipate our water department will upgrade at the same time that we're working on this project, which is a great opportunity to sort of share some of those expenses for the repaving of Cox Avenue when that happens. In terms of phasing, I mentioned earlier, we don't anticipate that the budget we have right now will pay for construction of the entire corridor. We do plan to design the entire corridor. And once we start to get some more high-level, confident cost estimates, we can talk a little bit more intelligently about what the phasing will be. But we anticipate we would start with the southern portion of the project, and hopefully make it up to Hilliard Avenue in the first phase. And then north of Hilliard would probably be a future phase, which I think could work out really well because there's some pretty significant development potential in the works for some of the county-owned properties and city-owned properties north of Hilliard. So it makes a lot of sense to sort of let that development evolve a little bit before we go in and build a lot of new infrastructure within the right-of-way. In terms of the design, Randy, please.
Oh, sorry, Dustin.
And y'all feel free to interrupt if you have questions as I go along.
So I'm just wondering if, because it's downhill, south of Hilliard, is that causing any issues with the stormwater replacement? Because I know that's a lot of the infrastructure and it's a lot of the work we won't see, but super important. Is it possible for us to do that first? And I guess it wouldn't be overwhelmed, right? It'd be underwhelmed by the current system, but it'd be okay. It's not, you don't have to do the whole thing all at once in terms of that part of it.
You don't. If anything, we would be upsizing the stormwater system, and it would make sense to do that from the low point up. And generally, with constructing any stormwater system, you want to start at the low point, anyways.
So that work out then? That'd be good.
Yeah, it would. In terms of informing the design of the scope that I mentioned earlier, there's been an effort, gosh, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even longer than that, with the South Slope Vision Plan, where the city staff has received a lot of feedback from the public on the overall vision plan for South Slope. And within that vision plan was a whole chapter devoted to Cox Avenue and what we'd like to see within Cox Avenue. So we had a really good starting point in terms of design intent by picking up that vision plan and sort of running with it. This is some of the early concept developments that we've used, playing off of that vision plan, that gives you sort of an idea of a typical cross section that we would expect to have with the new project. As you can see, we're widening the pedestrian areas to 10 feet consistently throughout the whole corridor. We're preserving as much on-street parking as we can, and trying to consolidate loading zones wherever we can. We're adding quite a bit of new bump outs that could serve as some stormwater filter areas. We've also got a 5-foot climbing lane with thermoplastic marking in it, and then a buffer between that climbing lane and the on-street parking on the east side of the roadway. So this is a sort of a typical section of what we would expect. Of course, each intersection is going to have a little bit of variability, but the idea of having a sharrow situation on the downhill lane and then a dedicated climbing lane on the uphill lane is what we've picked up from the vision plan and moved with. Randy.
Yeah, so I brought this up when this came to the Active Transportation Committee committee as well. But I think sometimes in the past, the city has emphasized the climbing lane and de-emphasized the descending lane with the misconception or the lack of encouragement for multimodal transportation. Sometimes we feel like, well, bikes can go as fast as cars downhill, so why can't they just share the lane? But in order to give bicycles an advantage so that people might say, well, maybe I should get out of my car and get on a bike, if there's a separate bike lane going downhill and they can just pass the cars and get rid of the traffic, congestion by being on a bike, then that actually encourages people to ride bikes rather than saying it's only as good as being in a car. So again, I want to strongly encourage us to have bike lanes in both directions, because we want to make people not just cars run into bikes by having a bike lane, but make bicycling a better option. And by having bike lanes that can bypass congested traffic, that helps that to happen.
Randy. Mr. Chesler?
Hey, Dustin, thank you. I'm sorry for coming in late, and perhaps you covered this already. What's the physical characteristics of a descending lane and a climbing lane, please? What is the difference?
If anybody on the call will give a better description than me, I welcome it. Mine might not be super technical. The descending lane, the downhill lane, which would be the southbound lane in this situation, as you can see, if you can see my cursor, we put sharrows within the roadway so that the bicyclist and the vehicles can share that lane. And then the ascending lane, there's a dedicated space. In this situation, it's 5 feet plus a 2-foot buffer between the parallel parking and the bike lane that allows a bicyclist who more than likely is going much slower than the vehicles to have a safer spot to climb that hill.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm aware of that. I just, the nomenclature hit me. Thank you.
Of course. So what's not shown in this image, but we do expect to have is street trees, street lights, street furniture, and opportunities for gathering zones within the pedestrian area as well. So that takes me to the end. This is a repeat of the first slide with the key takeaways. I'm happy to take any comments or answer any questions. Good news is there's no vote required, so quorum is not needed. But we do want to share these updates, and we'll definitely have more information as the design develops. Yes, sir, Randy.
Yeah, so again, and I know when you presented this to the Active Transportation Committee, we suggested a separate bike lane, and funding was an issue because we just didn't have the money to do it. But now that we received the extra money, the 2.9 million, I don't know if that changes things at all. Yeah, I just wondered if the additional funding helps to give a design. So I mean, I know it's hard, Dustin. I mean, I know it's hard too. And I never want to diminish, saying that, oh, it's just do this because the road's only so wide. And Joe, that's one reason why you have a ascending lane and not a descending lane sometimes, is because there's just not room. But so I guess in having a separated bike lane provides, again, another incentive to ride because you feel safer from traffic because you've got a physical barrier between a person using the bike lane and motorized traffic. But for me personally, I would say I'd rather have lanes on both sides of the road, because I think that, it does give us space because North Carolina law says you can only pass if you have a separate lane, for example, on the right side of the traffic. So, it creates a legal situation in which a bicycle can go by someone on the right if you have a descending lane. But if we couldn't do that, the next thing to me would be if we could put a separated lane on the climbing lane, even to at least provide a greater sense of protection for people that would use the bike lane there.
Yeah, and those are great comments, and what I tried to articulate in your earlier comments too, and probably didn't do a great job, is it's not, there will, like Paul had mentioned in his introduction, every community will always have budget constraints. There's never a project that has enough money. It just doesn't happen. And that's not the only limiting factor. I think the other equally limiting factor on this project, and really any other project we're going to work on, is just existing right-of-way and existing constraints. And if we wanted to put a bike lane on each lane, that means we would have to sacrifice something else, and that sacrifice would either be on-street parking on one side of the road or pedestrian sidewalks. There's not an opportunity to acquire additional right-of-way on this corridor. So I think it's the balance of trying to balance parking and loading zones, safe pedestrian parking, and safe pedestrian zones, safe bicycle zones, and safe transit of all modes.
Although, yeah, thank you for that, and I appreciate it totally. But we did have the demonstration project that did have bike lanes on both sides, although maybe it wasn't, there was some question whether it was bike or mixed use space on both sides, but we and that did work, and maybe we took away more parking spaces, but and I don't offhand remember all the public input, but I guess it was mixed from my understanding too, as far as the people who thought it was fine to have the spatial requirements that we have before compared to what it used to be. So, but I think there could be space for both, and there was parking on both sides of the street when we did the demonstration project. Maybe not as many spots as we'd have with this, but there was parking, and we had bike lanes on both sides, or at least a space that could be considered a bike lane. So, I know that it's a challenge for sure, but I think we need to take big, I think we need to do, so we're actually, we do have the limitations of the road width, but we are taking the whole road apart. I mean, you're doing the sewage, the water, system underneath it and stuff too. So this is our one chance to reshape this road. It won't be reshaped again. I mean, I know it's not going to change the width of it, but I think we should do everything possible to make this the ideal multimodal street, and I think that really we need to have facilities on both sides. And if that means taking, we are so scared of taking away anything, like it's Biltmore and College Patton and the fights we've had for those, because I don't think the city is bold enough in terms of, and I know you're getting tons of pushback from some very specific landowners, but from our perspective as a Multimodal Transportation Commission, I think it's our duty to ask for this to be the best possible multimodal street. And I think that even if we understand, which we do, I think you're going to get pushback from other people. I think it's still it's not our job to compromise on this. It's our job to push forth an agenda of complete streets and what's the best complete streets, which, the state has said that we have to do, and so I think it's important for us as a multimodal commission to say we're 100% behind making this as pedestrian and bike and transit friendly as possible. And if it's a sacrifice of motorized vehicles, it's the sacrifice of motor vehicles. That's, I think, our job as a multimodal transportation commission. And I just want to make sure that we do everything possible to emphasize that's what we would like to see.
Appreciate that, Randy. Kenny, I don't want to take over your chair responsibilities, but
no, that's fine. Elise, I think you had your hand up first.
Thanks. I have two questions and then a little bit of a comment. Regarding what Randy was saying, ideally we would have bicycle lanes on both sides. And so I'm wondering I'm seeing in your picture now that you have lane widths of 10 feet. Is that right?
Yes. That's
okay. Because I did learn recently that reducing lane width is a mechanism to help slow traffic. But I do think the guideline there is what 10 feet is or do they ever consider going less than 10 feet? Like if we made them 9-foot lanes and that would help as an additional traffic calming measure, and then we made room for the bike lane. Any consideration to that?
We would need to gain at the very least 5 additional feet. So even reducing, if it was even possible to reduce lanes to 9 feet, I don't know that it is. We're still 3 feet short.
Understood. My other question was, is there any thought, and maybe this is out of your scope, is there any thought about putting metered parking on this street? I know it's come up before that the city's kind of losing an opportunity to collect parking here. It's just free. And now, as well as charging for parking might deter some people from parking there and using other means of transportation to get there.
I'll let Jessica elaborate. In terms of the design, we are allowing space for meters to be put there, whether or not they're put there on day 1 or day, year 3 after completion. There is an opportunity, there's a very easy opportunity to make that happen.
Yes, we do intend to put meters there in the future, as well as the remainder of the South Slope. And also going back to your question about 10-foot lanes, Dustin's accurate. Our minimum standard width is 10 foot, which is pretty common for cities. DOT likes a 12-foot to a 14-foot lane, and our preference is a narrower lane for the reasons that you stated, Elise, which is safety and slowing vehicles. So 10 foot is the minimum that I think the city would do. And I would say that staff worked extensively with Dustin and the design team on all kinds of different options and trying to look at different ways that we could accommodate all modes, and transportation staff felt that, even though we'd like to see bike lanes on both sides, that this area is a very, very busy pedestrian area, particularly in evenings and weekends. And so we felt like a bike lane in the uphill direction, in order to accommodate wider sidewalks, and improve the pedestrian realm, that benefit outweighed the loss of the downhill bike lane. But it's one of those situations where we can't have everything. So that was what we felt most comfortable with. So just wanted to provide some of our reasoning behind that recommendation.
Gotcha. Thank you. I actually thought of, I have one other question or comment that I want to hit on, but then another thing that just popped up for me. Is there any chance of making this like a one-way street? Just throwing out something else there, if that was considered at all?
This is where we've got our transit station as well on Cox Avenue in Ashland. So we did not consider it, but I think that would be a very difficult thing for us to consider. I don't think that would be a realistic change.
Gotcha. All right. Then the last thing I just wanted to make, just kind of bring to people's attention as a representative from the Neighborhood Advisory Committee meeting, was that the South Slope Visioning Plan still has not been accepted by City Council because it's been held up with the desire to communicate more with the Southside United Neighborhood Association, who has just formed in the last couple of years anyway. And so there's been desire to more intentionally engage with the members of that neighborhood to help fully craft the South Slope Visioning Plan before it goes to council. So that's just like a comment, sharing some context. But then I'm wondering if there has been engagement with the South Slope neighborhood, with the Southside neighborhood regarding this particular project, and if so, like what might have come out of that.
I'm happy to respond to that. There has not been any engagement yet. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to sort of slow roll the public engagement and outreach on this project until we have a really high level of confidence of what we want the design to look like and know that we can afford that too. And then of course we'll share it and get feedback and make any adjustments that we need to based on that feedback. But we're being really intentional of not sharing a message until we know that message is accurate.
Sure. From a neighborhood perspective, I know that sometimes the neighborhood organizations feel like the city doesn't start those conversations with them until you're 90% of the way there. And then the kind of response is like, oh, well, it's too late to change anything. And I certainly value what you guys are doing. That's not to devalue, just from the perspective of neighborhood organizations. I know that's sometimes what we hear.
And that's a fair comment too. I appreciate you sharing that.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Bill?
Yeah. So are we saying that currently Cox Avenue has bike lanes on both sides of the road? Is that a yes?
I would say it's a no. Yeah, so the tactical urbanism project that was implemented several years ago, which still, I would say, remains mostly intact, because it was just a tactical urbanism project and we weren't moving curb lines. What was tested out was a multi-use area that's painted and is supposed to be a shared space for pedestrians and bicyclists, and it's between the curb line and the parked vehicles. So it's not technically a bike lane. It's also not technically a sidewalk. It's just a painted area.
So technically we don't, but in reality we do, correct?
I don't know that I would consider it a standard bike lane.
Is there a decal painted on the street that shows a bike on each side of the road?
I don't remember.
My point. My point is, I think I heard Randy say we've got them on both sides, and if that's true, it looks to me like we're going backwards here. Why would we have less bike lanes? And I mean, what space are we acquiring for what purpose when we take away a bike lane? And I don't totally get this. We're spending $14 million on less bike lanes?
It's a complete reconstruction of the street. So
why are we doing it?
Because the current sidewalk widths are not standard. There's a ton of ADA issues. We are trying to provide at least a real bike facility and provide wider sidewalks for the area that's becoming a very popular pedestrian area.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but there are non-standard sidewalks all over our city. They are everywhere, and so we've got a complete streets project, and the focus is on 10-foot sidewalks. It sounds like that's what's happened here.
I think it's a mistake a site visit would answer, I think, a lot of questions and concerns. What's painted as part of the tactical urbanism project does not work. It doesn't function the way it was intended to. It was simply a study to try ideas out. I think the takeaway, at least as far as I understand it, is that the added stop signs did a lot, and that really helped with speeding through the corridor. But the configuration of the bike lanes between the parallel parking and the sidewalk is not something that functions well, and we don't want to move that idea forward. The corridor right now does not have bike lanes on both sides. There's a very short section of the corridor that attempted to do it, and I think that attempt did not result in success.
Okay.
So
well,
I hear the advocacy, and I totally expect the advocacy as well. I think what we're presenting here is true multimodal improvements for pedestrians and bicyclists and vehicles for the community. So it's a big change for the corridor. And I think to over focus on not having a bike lane on one line, and I really don't mean to downplay it, because I know the importance of it, but when you have such a limited corridor, you've got to make some level of sacrifice, and this is the one item that I think through multiple studies and multiple iterations just didn't make sense to try to include.
Well, okay, I get that, and this might be the best idea, but you've put us in a position where we don't know that, because what would put us in a better position to accept your idea is if you say, here are two scenarios. Here's one scenario where we've grabbed all the possible space we possibly can to put bikes on both sides, and this is what it looks like. And then you show us this one. But you've got us in a position where we're boxed into a corner, and I mean, how can we accept this in a favorable way without seeing what the alternative is? That's just not a good process for me to participate in.
Bill, I appreciate you, Bill, and I hate to just jump in here, but I do live on Cox Avenue, which I think you know. And there are not 2 bike lanes, and it's not great. You could come down here today and see that we got a show at Rabbit, and there's 8 people wide on the sidewalk. They're walking in the bike lanes. I mean, it's a circus down here on Cox Avenue. So I understand your feelings about sidewalks and other parts of the city, but Cox Avenue is a major revenue generator. It's a cultural center for downtown. And I think Elise brings up a great point, which if everyone rolls back the clock just a little way to the struggle that was the bike lanes on Patton Avenue, we'll remember that neighborhood in order to come to our table and be allies for more. Anyone remember what happened there? And it wasn't pretty. Basically, that South Side neighborhood, the legacy neighborhood, came to the table and said, bike lanes aren't super interesting to us as a community. They may be interesting to you guys, but they're not interesting to us. So while I hear your passion and I respect you, Bill, I think completely reflective of the entire community in this area. And it's certainly not reflective of the way I feel about Cox Avenue.
No, that's great context. I mean, we need all that context to feel comfortable about these $15 million projects. So that's super. I mean, I don't know. I just asked for a more complete presentation, if you don't mind, because you're asking us to be comfortable with something, and until we see all the context, it's hard to be.
Bill, I think you nailed it on the head. It's just it is.
And I say I agree, and also, yeah, I agree, and also I with Elise, like that's great. I think, outside of just having the privilege of a board and a commission here, I think the neighborhood and the people most impacted by it should be brought in at the earliest stage.
Mm-hmm. Randy, you've had your hand up for forever.
Yeah. So I like Elise's idea of making this one way, and I respect, Jessica, the fact that north of Hilliard is the transit station, but maybe just even south of Hilliard, making that one way might be a solution that we should consider, because we want this to be a slow street and people can definitely access it. And there's Ashland, which is a connector on the other side of this, so that you can get both directions on that street, and then, Biltmore 2 blocks away, of course. But yeah, I think that's something we should look at, because having it one way would give us more room for a wide sidewalk for pedestrians, bike lanes in both directions, and make this more of a slower pedestrian, bicycle oriented street, even if it's just from Hilliard to South Side. So, and then since we're not considering the north side as much right now, we could see how, I think that's something we should look at and consider.
Jake?
Yes. I've heard a lot about this. How many parking spaces would we actually gain on the entire street if we were to include those?
I'm starting to feel like this was not a great idea to share an update when we don't have a lot of design detail to share at this point in time. We have not done an analysis of existing parking versus proposed parking or loading or anything like that at this point.
Okay. Because I go to the post office there all the time. I go to restaurants over there and food venues and bars. The street is completely lined with a ton of paid parking options. I mean, if we're getting 20 parking spots, and we just have to worry about one cyclist dying every year, is that really worth it? Like, why not just put in 2 bike lanes and eliminate the parking spots and also have the wide sidewalks?
Yeah, well, we will. This probably won't address your question or comment. We will have a lot of outreach on this project when we have a better understanding of the proposed design and the costs for that as well. And we intend to get feedback from y'all on that design. We intend to get feedback from the neighborhoods on that design, from the business owners and the residents in this area. So we anticipate a lot of comments, and we anticipate some of those comments conflicting with one another. And we'll do what we always do, which is try to address as many as we can and blend a project that's going to satisfy and fit in the community the best.
Thanks, Dustin. Jessica?
Yeah, I just like to maybe remind folks or inform folks that haven't been involved until maybe the last couple of years. But I mean, this is a project that has evolved not just out of thin air, but from a significant amount of preliminary work that was done, starting with the tactical urbanism project, which again was meant to be a temporary test kind of situation that lasted quite some time. But that was in and of itself a form of engagement that was very significant. There was a whole report written about it, and we worked with Asheville on Bikes on that. And essentially that project was meant to be a form of engagement and to study what the impacts and effects would be on the corridor from a safety improvement by doing that. Then the city undertook the South Slope plan, which granted it wasn't accepted, but the one part about Cox Avenue from that plan is was another round of engagement in collecting information from the businesses, the folks that live there. There's a lot of folks that are living in that corridor, as well as using it. So this is not, where this design has evolved from is accumulation of all of that information that we have gotten over the last 6+ years. So trying to balance all of the needs that are there, including the business needs and the desire to keep parking in that area is part of it. So we're not going to be able to fit everything in, and we've heard from the community that parking is something that's very, very necessary because of the large amount of residential and business activity, and we found that it does help kind of slow the street. So I just want you guys to know that there's been a lot of engagement around this general project for quite some time, and we'd be happy to share some of that history and documents with you guys, and that would probably be really helpful to understand how we got to where we are.
Jared, do you want to jump in real quick? No, Jared's gone. When I think of complete streets, I think of mobility for everyone. And when I drive downtown, hitting a one-way street is not good for mobility. So I appreciate two-way traffic. I also appreciate on-street parking. I appreciate the bus pullout. I think 10-foot sidewalks are kind of standard for downtown and the bare minimum. And I would advocate for 10-foot sidewalks over bike lanes on both sides. So I think personally, I find this design hits a lot of the targets that we're looking for. And as a cyclist too, I'm totally comfortable with a uphill bike lane and just sharing the road on the way down because it is pretty darn steep. I get Randy's point about incentivizing, but if we had 5 more feet in the right of way, throw it in there, but we really just don't. And I think Jared called it out too, where it's like people have competing priorities, and I feel like this crams in as much as possible, and it does a pretty darn good job. Jared, you're back.
Yep. Yeah, I know you talked about public input, Jessica, so I don't want to wear you out and I don't want to wear Jake out, but others have heard me talk about it as well, which is that I'm not a fan of free parking in the public right of way. There's a cost to us as a city for providing that parking. So if I had my ruthers, I'd love to see this be metered parking, which is what's called for in our ordinance is metered parking throughout CBD. So I think that also helps go back into the operational budget that takes care of the structured parking as well. And it may not be popular, and we may not have the budget to enforce, but I know I drive on many roads down the street that have a speed limit that isn't being enforced, but we expect people to do the right thing, and I think that's okay. So that would be just my little added incentive there. If somebody can pay, $8 per beer, they can pay a little bit for convenience to not have to walk too far.
Well, and speaking again about trade-offs, it's like I see permeable pavement on the parking, so that makes me like the parking more. I see street trees that, maybe I would, if I were designing it, I might get rid of some of the on-street parking and put more trees in there. But it's a good design in my opinion. And Dustin, if there's nobody else dying to chime in, I'm eager to jump into the next thing. We have a quorum now too, so we can make some votes on retroactively. But does anybody have anything else for Dustin? Nope. Okay. Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you all.
I think sometimes we don't mean to be adversarial at all. And then Dustin, I think we so appreciate what you do, and I never want to take away from that. I think we have strong opinions and we voice them, but I think hopefully it's always in an atmosphere of respect and appreciation for what you do for us, even if our tone maybe doesn't always sound like that all the time when we're advocating for what we believe in. So thank you.
That's exactly how I took it, Randy. I appreciate the comment anyways. And thank you all very much. I appreciate the back and forth and the different comments.
Thank you, Dustin.
Have a great afternoon.
Jessica, I see we have a quorum now, and I see that county staff has jumped back on. Is that with the intent of going back on the agenda?
Oh, I didn't realize. Sure. Yeah. If we could do that quickly, then I'm comfortable with that.
As long as Joseph is still here. So we have a quorum now.
I'm still here. I apologize to everyone for being late. Go ahead.
That's okay. Matt or Nathan, are you ready to jump into the item that we kind of skipped over?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming back.
Okay, hold on one second. So in your agenda packet, you have links to some of the documents that I'll be going over today. Let me change this to slideshow mode. So this is a request for a right-of-way closure, and it's on behalf of Buncombe County, and it is for a small portion of Sawyer Street. And this is actually right off of Cox Avenue and is kind of not related directly to our previous discussion, but is kind of interesting because we are seeing a lot of development happen on this corridor, and we've got a project that the county is going to be bringing forward, and this right-of-way closure is associated with that future development project, which is an affordable housing project. So Buncombe County is the owner of both 50 and 52 Cox Avenue, and they have petitioned for this closure. Again, it's in association with the development of approximately 200 unit affordable apartment complex, and the commissioners actually approved the conceptual design, I guess you would say, or the conceptual site layout at their April 2nd meeting, and their intention is for this project to be 80% area median income. But what they're looking for today is to close what is currently Sawyer Street, just a small portion of it, and it is currently a street that is in use. So their intention is to close this section just to vehicle traffic, but to leave it open for bicycle and pedestrian use. So here is a map that shows what we're talking about. It might be a little bit hard to see, but the county owns the properties on either side of Sawyer Street. And so part of the reason that they're requesting this closure actually has to do with some kind of obscure things with the the tax credits that they can get for affordable housing, but it has to be part of one parcel. And so the street closure is kind of, I think, our collective innovative way of making this a contiguous parcel. Therefore, they would be eligible for a significant benefit through the federal tax credit program for affordable housing. So just for reference, the transit center is essentially just across the street. You can see the big parking lot to the left. That's the former Talbert lot, which will become the Art Place project. So this affordable housing project will be very conveniently located to transit and other transportation. The city staff has reviewed this at our technical review committee. We met and looked at this on May 6th. And overall, the recommendation was to recommend approval of the closure request and bring it forward to the Multimodal Transportation Commission. There are a couple of what I'll say minor items that staff asked the applicant to bring back to TRC at the final approval. And so, but overall, the recommendation was to bring this forward, and pending getting a legal survey from the county in order to be able to publicly notice the closure, we will take this to city council after that for the public hearing officially to close this. And so really our motion is to recommend that the city council approve the requested closure of approximately 140 feet of Sawyer Street between 50 and 52 Cox Avenue. I didn't have it written in this presentation, but like I said, our conditions that we've asked the county and that they've agreed to are we will require a public access easement over this closure area, so it will still be open for public access. They're not actually going to be building a building on that portion of the street that would be closed. There would be a pass-through, a wide pass-through, and so it would just be inaccessible for vehicle traffic, but it would be completely open to the public. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we also have Matt Card here from Buncombe County Planning and Development Department to answer questions as well.
Brandon?
Yeah, I have a couple things. One, I think in general, it's great. Anytime we can maintain traffic for bikes and pedestrians and make it more friendly by not having cars in there all the time, it's great. So one is and this is just a side note too, but 80% of the medium income or whatever is just not low enough. So I know it's a big issue here, but really I'd love to see it at 70 or 60%. And I know that's not our purview at all, but I know county's listening, and I just want to make sure that they hear that, because 80% is still unaffordable for many people in our community. But secondly, too, are we going to have any kind of temporary barriers? Like I know in Europe, they've got all these ballards that raise up and down so that emergency vehicles can still get in, or even delivery vehicles can still get in at certain times of the day, but the ballards go up and down so that during most of the day they're up and you can't drive vehicles through, but other times you can. So I know it's more expensive and stuff too, but it seems like this might be a place that you want to do that, because I think there'll be concerns, right? What about emergency vehicles? They need to get through there. And so how does that work? And then I don't know if delivery needs to or not too, but I just wonder if that kind of thing has been considered at all.
Yeah, so Matt Card, Community Development Analyst, Community Development Division of Buncombe County. Randy, great questions. With regard to the 80% AMI will be the absolute maximum that we'll have there. So it's really actually less than or up to 80%. We'll have a range of AMI, that we're going to target. We don't know exactly specifically what that looks like, but there will definitely be a range below 80%. With regard to the kind of section that could be accessible to, emergency services vehicles, we have talked about that. And, maybe there is a solution. We don't necessarily have anything worked out at this time. But we hear what you're saying and have, had the same conversation at the county. I think it would be good to have, some kind of removable bollards or some kind of system, like you say, where we could get in there and we could service the utilities that are in there or, provide emergency services. So yeah, that is definitely something on our radar.
Elise?
Hi. I am just trying to figure out what the building that currently sits on the corner of Cox and Aston, like what's inside of that building, because I see most of the redevelopment site is service parking right now. And Jared can tell you all about how service parking is terrible. But I'm just curious what is currently in this other building, because if you look on Google Maps, it's like really vague what's in there.
Is it the elections, folks? It used to be the gymnastics.
Yes.
Yeah, the gymnastics.
Yeah, the gymnastics building, the old former gymnastics building, that is election services, I think, storage right now. And then across the street, there is also county services in that building as well. Across Sawyer Street, yeah.
Here's to converting surface parking and storage to affordable housing. Jared?
Yeah, great. That obviously all that stuff's really my bag. But what I'm interested in, and I know I'm not a voting member, just Neanderthal over here, but was wondering about the conditions upon the closure of right-of-way. I know when we do conditional rezonings, in the Planning and Zoning Commission, we kind of include those in our motion. So at this, like in this case, I think, if we feel it's important to provide, access for medical requirements or medical needs through that right of way for future use, that would be something we note now. Is that part of this process?
Yeah, so I probably shouldn't have used the word condition, because technically we can't put a condition on a right-of-way closure. So really what I meant to say was that we've discussed with the county that the desire is for there to be a public access easement to maintain bike and ped access. We didn't specifically talk about what Randy brought up about having kind of intermittent use for vehicles. But we also have, one of the things that we've asked the county to bring back to TRC is we'll have further conversations about emergency access and making sure that AFD and APD are comfortable with the access. So all of that is to say is I don't think that the Multimodal Commission can add a condition to this motion, like a requirement, but you can, I think, indicate that is something that you would like to be included. If that makes sense. It's kind of a fine line.
Yeah, it does make sense. And why I bring this up for kind of other people's orientation and point of reference is, being a resident on Aston Street there, at the end of my street, basically on Biltmore, there's a really just awesome green wall. It's like a historic green wall that protects people from falling into a vacant lot. And I believe that right-of-way closure behind that lot came before this board and this commission for review and was rejected, which is fine. I think it was a hotel developer who was looking at utilizing it. And I'd heard in the past that it's really important that we know kind of how these properties are being used. And so these right-of-ways, for instance, on Sawyer Street here, which is literally at the back of the property I live on. So I see this day in, day out, every day. It is an actively used road by the neighborhood behind me. It's actively used for parking as well. And so this isn't really a right-of-way closure. This is a straight-up street closure. And so, look, I'm all for approving it. However, I think it's important that this commission understand that what we're doing for this project is needed in many other parts of the city to allow for development to kind of occur and be unlocked. And if we don't like some of those vacant lots downtown and we want more street level activation and we want infill development, I think having an open mind when these come before us with some degree of ambiguity, because for instance, right now, it sounds like we're going to have no legal recourse on what the county decides to do with this road closure. Of course, in an idyllic world, there's going to be like a little stage for buskers and there's going to be emergency access and bike lanes through it, and it's all going to be awesome. But there's no guarantee when we provide this closure. So I just wanted to take a minute and kind of let everyone know how this procedure also transfers and translates into the rest of the world.
I will mention that this does have to come to planning and zoning, and not the right-of-way closure itself, but when the county actually is bringing forward the development project, that part will also go through the whole process of TRC. I believe it's going to be a conditional zoning. So there will be the planning and zoning stage as well as council. If I correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think that that's the case. So from a right-of-way closure standpoint, we have less ability to provide conditions or have requirements, but there will be the opportunity with the actual development itself and the application that's brought forward. Right now, the county has kind of a concept site layout, but it's not finalized. And I think there might be opportunity for us to have conversation with them about the roadway itself. It could be that it's closed and made into private, a private parcel, but just as we are going to require that there be public access for bike and ped, there's a world in which we can still have it be a private section of road that is used by vehicles too. So I don't think we're necessarily removing that as an option with this closure.
But to your point, Jared, I think it is important to think of it that way of like,
Yeah,
are we
sure.
comfortable if this road is permanently closed to motor vehicles? And because that weighs on us, at least.
Thanks. This might be pivoting away from that, but if you go back to slide 3 with the like goldish outline, I just had a question about this little alley that's going from Sawyer north to Aston. It looks like right now that's kind of like a one, based on the directionality of the parking spaces, it's looking like that's sort of like a one-way alley between Sawyer and Aston. And seeing that it's cut out, outside of this yellow box, I'm wondering, is the intention to keep that like that, or maybe it's too early to speak to that?
I believe that it's going to be part of the requirement of the development will be to bring that up to a roadway standard so that it is not just an alley. It's that it would be a standard roadway access of standard width. But we also haven't seen like a proposed development, but that is a conversation that we've had with the county staff.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm also wondering, like, if people start going down Sawyer west towards Cox and then they're met with some bollards, like, you're not going to really turn around very well there. So if there's kind of like a getaway.
Correct.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
That's really helpful to know, because that also impacts our decision too. Because does it affect circulation a little bit, but not tremendously. Any other comments on this project? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move to recommend City Council approve the requested closure of 140 feet of Sawyer Street between 50 and 52 Cox Avenue.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
Elise made the motion, Joseph second. Any other final thoughts? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Who's first? I'll go first. I'm an aye. Joseph?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Great. Elise?
Aye.
Randy?
Aye.
And that's all of us. Quorum. Whoop, whoop. Unanimous. All right, motion carries. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jessica, for presenting as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, man.
All right, next up, we've got Vidilla. Thanks for hanging in for an hour and 45 minutes. This is a consideration to make a recommendation on the proposed policy to eliminate residential off-street parking requirements along transit-supported corridors. Vidilla, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. I'll try to be brief since it's almost 5. Hey, Jared. Thanks for all those emojis, whatever they call them. So let's just jump into this proposal. This is coming really primarily from the Planning and Zoning Commission as a concept for the city to consider. So you can think of this as a preliminary discussion. So to begin, let me give you an overview of what the city's current regulations are. Under the zoning code section 7.8, there are standards for every zoning district that define what your parking or loading standards are. And it basically says parking and loading standards are provided, shall be provided as required by section 711. So you go to section 711, which is below here, and we list every use in our table of uses and then define the minimum and the maximum number of parking allowed. So this is a snippet from that code. It's a very long table. But for example, if you have a single family dwelling with 2 bedrooms or less, you have 1 parking space for a minimum and 2 for a maximum. So that's, where we stand today. There is what I'm calling an exemption that's on the books in section 711 that is for urban residential developments. And really it says, if you're located within this area that I show here on the map, that's within a mile of the central business district, between the river and the mountain, north and south, which is this black outline, dotted line, effectively, you don't have to provide off-street parking for residential development, right? So this has been on the books for quite a while. And to let you know how it's working, we did a little bit of analysis within this area. And this isn't looking at every project that has happened in the last 30 years. I don't know how many years we've looked at here, but to give you sort of a general sense, we broke down lots of different projects, looked at how many, a lot of these were mixed use developments. You can see the address on the left, the number of housing units. The third column is the total parking, residential parking that would have been required, because again, in this area, parking is not required. And then the parking that was required for commercial use, because this area does not exempt commercial parking. And then you see here the parking provided. And what you can see is that, some of the what you can see, I guess that's my next slide here, is that all the projects provided parking. So even though off-street parking isn't required for residential, all the residential projects included parking still, and that 38% of the projects required provided less parking than would have been required. So it shows that there's a mismatch from our current standard, and you could make the argument that it makes sense to reduce parking, if not eliminate it. So this brings us to today. We had the Planning and Zoning Commission came to us with some recommendations, and they looked at our current section 711.2 and basically said, let's consider expanding this off-street parking requirement for residential to expand it within a quarter mile of transit-supported corridors throughout the city, and within a half a mile of transit stops. So here's a map of the city of Asheville. I haven't labeled it, but I'll just talk it through. The dots are transit stops and the lines are the bus routes. So for some of you, this may be a surprise that we provide transit services outside of the city of Asheville all the way to Black Mountain and in other parts, but that is the case. That's why the map is sort of offset and kind of wonky there. So the current proposal would suggest that we should consider exempting this is a quarter mile buffer around the transit lines. And then more significantly, the next image here is showing an exemption of off-street parking within a half a mile of the transit stops. And you can see that's practically the entire city. So I just have a couple slides here with some questions, and then we can open it up. So that it sort of begs the first question, and this came up at the Planning and Zoning Commission. Would this make sense if it rolled out to create a standard that requires quantifying whether a project is within or without the district, or should just the entire city be exempted? Really, we could quantify and get some data for you to let you know how many parcels would be outside of this. But that's one question that I'm sort of throwing out there for discussion. And another, and this also came up at the Planning and Zoning Commission, is whether this should only be for residential parking or whether it should also include other uses or all uses. So with that, I will turn it over to you, and I'll mention that this is proposed to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission next month for some refinement and further discussion. So this is a great opportunity to weigh in. Thank you.
Thanks, Vidila. Anybody have any thoughts? I'll chime in. When you showed me that map of where the exemptions along the transit line fit out, the first thought was, well, that's like the whole city. So, and then except for the interstate over there in a couple of pockets. But yeah, if it simplifies the process to make it a citywide thing, I'm all for that. I also appreciate you talking about how the market kind of resolved the issue in a way. If you leave it to the free market, it might actually work out in the end. At least you had your hand up.
Thanks. I was kind of waiting for Jared to chime in about this. But for me personally, just from a simplicity perspective, it would seem to make sense to me to just go along with the whole city rather than have anyone who's developing a piece of property have to get out their little radius circle and figure out, are they within the circle or not? So me personally, that's my view, is to just make it across the entire city. And wanted to reiterate, Vidila, thank you for the numbers. I think that really demonstrated how just because we reduce the minimums doesn't necessarily, some people think, if we don't require it, well, there just won't be any off-street parking. And that's not the case. Like Kenny said, the market will decide. So,
that's a good point, Elise. I think some people have a fear that if you drop off-street parking requirements, it'll create chaos because people will not provide it off-street. But our little example here shows that's not true. So we have local examples demonstrating the counter argument. And a lot of cities now are moving in this direction. So it really goes to show that developments investing millions of dollars make the correct decision based on their needs. And in a lot of cases, that leads to less parking, which frees up more space for housing or trees or public other public goods.
like bike lanes. Randy?
Yeah, thanks, Vidula. So who's the detractors from this? Who will we envision wouldn't like this rule? Because if it seems like it's, if we were having a problem of not having enough development in Asheville, then maybe that would be something that would be an issue. But since that's not a concern, it doesn't seem like there would be a lot of opposition to this. Or who do you see as being opposed to it?
Well, this is Asheville, and so I'd say, in general, there are, to be fair, there are people on all sides of the issue, and so when people have been here for a long time and experience increase in traffic and congestion, a lot of it just comes with growth of population, and so I think sometimes the thinking is if we can keep people from reducing lanes and reducing off-street parking standards and things like this, it'll help to keep the problem away. So there's some of that thinking, but it's at this point, I'll just say, we haven't done a lot of analysis. This came to us primarily from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So now we're starting to, reach to our local knowledge base, which is you, to guide us and to give us some ideas, what kind of data you might want or you think would be important, or what kind of questions we should be preparing for, to sort of make the case, whatever that should be, and to prepare to make that sort of public, make the public case. So I'm not really sure who would necessarily be opposed to this because we haven't done outreach.
Elise?
Just to respond to Randy, I know that there are some neighborhoods might be a little wary of this because, as I was saying, some people think, oh, there are no minimums, then there just won't be any at all. And so if now everyone's having to park on the street, and now all the parking on the street right in front of your house is taken, now you have to park farther away, and so you end up kind of like displacing people all along the way. And I can imagine some people might be opposed to this, looking at it from that direction. But again, when you look at it more critically, you can tell that parking will be provided. It's not like there won't be any. It'll just be a little less than there was before.
That seems fair.
All right, Jerry?
And I would prefer to just kind of let everyone voice their thoughts and concerns first. And I can hang back in the background and provide context as necessary. I did help craft this amendment with the Housing Working Group, the chair and the vice chair as well. And so I have a pretty good understanding of it. Part of the reason that it's being, the reason it was brought forth the way it was, along transit lines and around bus stops, versus being a citywide initiative, that's really due to the fact that it aligns very tightly with the 2018 comprehensive plan, which really focuses on the transit corridors themselves. And the comprehensive plan is basically, it defines those for us, and it calls out the half-mile walking distance, as all of us are aware because we're humans who walk around. Once you get beyond kind of a half-mile walking distance, you may feel less encouraged to use public transit or go to a bus stop. And that language has also been crafted to soften the public-facing approach. I think, there is this idea that you take the map and you do the overlay and you can see that it is, call it 90% of the city or 85% of the city. As soon as it becomes a complete removal of a parking minimum, there's all this kind of hyperbolic messaging that's really easy to mobilize. And so that's where I think you would find neighborhoods that would be apprehensive about it. So, for instance, I was talking with a local designer today about Haywood Road form-based code, and they were expounding on what a benefit they felt it was. And I told them, yeah, I can accept form-based code when it has no parking requirements, because then the developer has more room to kind of play around with their shapes and their space. And he immediately was frustrated. This is a well-known design professional locally. He was immediately frustrated because he said the neighborhoods along Haywood Road are not going to like the removal of those parking minimums. And I think it's easy to operate in a silo where we feel confident about the abolition of parking minimums. And then when it's mobilized in a certain narrative, it can be really difficult to have the political will and the political backing to get the support from council to get amendments to the ordinance complete. So that's where, like Vidila said, there were people on our commission who pushed for complete abolition of residential parking minimums inside the city limits. I think it is a best practice to remove those parking minimums because it allows for more innovative and progressive development types that may have shared parking or shared offsite parking or maybe something we can't even dream up yet. So that's just kind of a brief overview from my perspective of some of the public dialogue that may still be in front of us.
Jared, it sounds like kind of what you're saying is we attach the transit piece up to it so that we can tell people, well, there's a rationale behind it, and we're not just obliterating this thing that's been there forever. We're saying, well, it's attached to transit, and hope people don't look too deeply into it.
Well, yeah, it's really about being transparent and saying, like, look, so I mean, I know people who live right out on exit 44 at that interchange of Smoky Park Highway and Interstate 40. And if you go out there, it looks completely like any suburban neighborhood you may find on the outskirts of any city. And so if somebody hears parking minimum abolition and they think about that, right, that area, they're going to go, oh my gosh, you literally can't survive out there without a car. Where when you say, look, this is about an iterative step to improving the sustainability of our transit system, to providing an opportunity for diverse lifestyles, to hopefully encouraging equity within our community, those conversations stimulate a little bit more rational approach to kind of the public discourse. So, and I think people too also right now in this moment are feeling a deep desire to have transparency from our government and from our planning department. And so for us to be able to say, we are doing this not for all types of housing, but for the type of housing specifically that wants to be near transit stations, that wants to encourage bus riders, and that access to transit is a part of the affordability calculation in our city. And so somebody who has access to good, reliable, Bill, like you like to say, high frequency transit, that leads to better lifestyles with tighter communities, more active and engaged communities. And just having a transit component there really, it encourages that dialogue down a very positive path, I think. But that's, it's not for me to guide this discussion, but I did want you to know kind of as the planning and zoning board, how we landed more focusing on those transit in particular corridors and stops.
What about the non-residential uses? Anybody have any thoughts? Trader Joe's is going to get away with not building any parking if they can. Yes, Bill?
What would non-residential be? I'm trying to imagine what that is. Is it just commercial?
Yes. I mean, any other uses, commercial, office, industrial. Again, businesses will provide what they need, but the current proposal is only considering exempting off-street parking for residential uses.
And so is there a off-street parking requirement for commercial?
There is, yep. For like, I think for retail, we have like, 350 square feet. For every 350 square feet, you need one parking space or something like that. So it's very, if you go through the off-street parking requirement table, it's very detailed depending on the use.
Okay. Just sharing some reactions. I love this idea. And it seemed the chart you showed was a good analysis. I'm wondering if those off-street parking spaces that currently exist in some of those properties were simply because there was space on the parcel, right? I mean, they had available space, so they made it useful for parking, as opposed to if a developer were given a blank slate of property, you may have ended up with fewer parking spaces. I don't know. I mean, it's pure hypothesis. But where I'm going with this is there any way you could connect or link this type of a policy with something that reflected transportation investment, especially in the commercial realm? I don't know if y'all remember it, but there was an article in the paper about parking at Trader Joe's, to bring that up. I mean, literally hit the paper, right? And what was interesting was that the articles didn't say a thing about the fact that we've got buses running up and down Merriman Avenue at about a 15 or 30 minute clip, because there's two routes that run up and down there, right? So buses is an option for Trader Joe's parking, and it didn't even hit the article. And believe me, I wrote him and let him know that he missed out on something. But nonetheless, I'm thinking, is there a way to link a policy like this with some type of a transit policy as well? And
well,
I'm not proposing what that would be, but there needs to be a relationship between density and transit frequency. Somehow, if we could build that into our policies, that would be a really sound move, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, just to respond briefly, I think the impetus of the proposal is exactly that, right? It's responding to a basis of exemption in proximity to transit. Now, we know that some of those transit lines, like you're suggesting on Merriman Avenue, have much higher frequency and are more reliable. I think the reality is that most people don't take transit, and so, the status quo is more concerned about how easy it is to park at Trader Joe's, even though it's in Trader Joe's interests to make their business plan, make it such that the parking lot is full all the time, so that, they don't have downtimes. They prefer their customers to wait for a couple of minutes because they know that their product is right, and they time it such that it's not perfect for the customers, and from that perspective. So I think it's tricky, but it goes to show that parking will be provided by businesses as long as the market requires it. And in our city, that's going to be the case for quite a while.
Thanks.
Jared.
You're on mute.
Bill, I hear you, and I like the enthusiasm and I like the idea of trying to incentivize some kind of reinvestment back into transit. The way I try to think about it sometimes is that right now, there's not a demand for land near transit because transit isn't maybe high frequency enough, isn't convenient enough to some of that land. If that transit were a light rail, right? A really high value transit system that's super consistent, super reliable. You know, if that were there, then the land value would be really high, and you would want them to invest back in that transit, and they would have a big incentive to invest back in that transit, and there would be also a significant tax increase along those transit corridors. In our case, where transit maybe isn't where some of our residents would like it to be, probably where some of us would like it to be, we actually need to also try to, we have a desire from the developer to develop there, so the riders engage the transit, and therefore maybe transit can be responsive to that demand. And so it's about trade-offs. I think our transit is relatively immature to try to pursue policy that would be burdensome for developers along transit corridors, if that makes sense. Right now, it's about incentivizing development on those corridors to activate them and maybe get like less than 50 darn car lots off of Tunnel Road. I don't know, like all of Tunnel Road, once you get out there a little ways, is all car lots. So this is really about trying to balance some of those incentives and take an iterative approach. I don't think adding additional policies or, you know, asks from the development community will get a positive return there, if that makes sense.
Well, let me just respond that transportation and land use is intimately connected. I think this is part of what you're talking about. And in the city of Asheville, our residential density citywide is approximately 3 units an acre. You know, and a lot of people threw out the number that transit at a minimum needs at least 8 to 12 units an acre to support transit, especially something like BRT or even more, what Jared's suggesting. So you should all know that we are in the middle of reviewing land use changes based on this missing middle housing study that we recently had completed and an affordable housing plan that we're rolling out. So as we make changes to allow for more construction in Asheville, and keep in mind that 2/3 of our residential districts only allow single family, right? It's very difficult for us to catch up to a land use, a residential density that allows for a population that can support transit for real. So they both have to happen. And so this is an opportune time to be making changes like this, because the transportation changes support more changes for construction of residential development.
Thanks, Fadila. I think that's a really important thing to bring up. And I appreciate you coming to this commission too, because we like to talk about land use too. So as you move forward with this, I would love future opportunities for you to come and chat with us and let us know what's happening and give us a chance to weigh in if possible. But in the interest of time, I'd like to wrap things up. Does anybody have any last questions for Fadila? All right. Well, thanks, Fadila. I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
And just quickly, Joe, I know you wanted to mention Patton Avenue, and if there's any committee updates, now's the time to jump in, planning and zoning and or transit. Hi, Nicole.
Yes, sir. We need to go back and vote on the agenda in the minutes.
Let's do it. We have a quorum. All in favor of the agenda?
Well, you have to have a motion.
Okay, I move that we approve the agenda. Do we have a second?
We just lost Joe, so now we don't have a quorum anymore.
Okay,
He might be
now
switching to an alternate device.
They need to put the skull emoji down here so I can send the dead face.
Well, Nicole, are we just out of luck then?
Kenny, would you like a quick update on the Asheville unpaved while we're waiting to see if Joe?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, real quick. It's already 5:15.
Oh, there he is.
Okay. Asheville Unpaved is coming very close to an agreement with the Asheville ABL Unpaved partners The last thing that we need to do is help with an easement on Asheville City School property behind Asheville Middle School. And we will be going to their meeting on June 10th to see if they vote for the easement or not. And whether they do or not, we plan to go to council to approve the agreement with AVL Unpaved on July 23rd. And the reason for that long time between the school board vote and the council's consideration is because the AVL partners are taking vacations in June, thinking that we would have been done with council by then. So we're pushing it back to July 23rd for a vote at council.
Thanks, Lucy. Joe, do you want to mention Patton Avenue? If you're there, Joe.
He might have been wanting to let you know that there will be a Patton Avenue corridor study public meeting at Harrah's Cherokee Center on May 29th from 5 to 7.
Great. Okay. Let's go back then real quick and do the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Elise.
Hurrah. Second? I'll second. Can I second? Seconded. All in favor? I hear no nays. So I'm going to say that that motion carries. Same for the minutes from April 24th. A motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a quorum still?
No, Joe left.
Oh, okay.
Once the quorum is established, even it doesn't fall off even if one member leaves. So
Great.
You can still go ahead and vote. You just need someone to make the motion.
Okay, I move that we approve the minutes. Any second? Come on, before you hop off. Elise, are you there?
Elise, I'll second.
Yes, great.
Trying to give other people opportunity.
Okay, I'll just say that that motion carries as well, unless there's any disapproval. Great.
Oh,
okay.
Joe's back. Real quick, does anyone want to make a motion to recommend Jake Smith and Kate Ryba to replace Joe Barker?
Yep. I move that we recommend one or both or either. Is there a second?
Elise, I'll second.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Any other dangling participles?
No, sir.
Okay. Great. Thank you for sticking on, everybody. Without further ado, I will adjourn the meeting.